Marvel Rivals is out now and has a lot of interesting character designs, and I made a couple videos about how those designs compare to Overwatch and where Overwatch can learn from those, and I want to talk about one particular thing here that Marvel Rivals does. I don't even know if it does particularly well, but it does do, and I think that there are some solutions to Overwatch heroes that might work with this. So we're going to be talking about percentage-based damage. So what does that even mean? Well, percentage-based damage does different amounts of damage based on your max health. So in Marvel Rivals, the best example I think is Wolverine. Wolverine does basically the same amount of damage percentage-wise of their health bar when he's shooting a tank like Hulk, you know, who's got like 800 or something, versus shooting a regular squishy who's got like 250. The time to kill is basically the same because Wolverine does more damage based on his victim's max health, okay? It's often on these flat damage over time abilities, some that don't have big spikes to them. So like Wolvie, of course he has ways to augment it, just make it go faster, but for the most part he's got like a flat 1, 2, 3, 4, and then after he's got like the Swiss cheese, you know, just keep slicing and slicing and slicing. But it's a flat rate, right? It's not going to increase or decrease at all in that time. Scarlet Witch works just like this too, although she's got a different thing we'll talk about in a second here. And basically what this can do is it can reduce crazy burst damage on low health characters, but increase damage dealt to high health characters, right? So you want characters to be doing a lot of damage, but you don't necessarily want them to disproportionately affect some more than others. And there are a couple of problems with that regular just percentage-based solution as well. Sorry, I gotta interrupt this very dashingly handsome man here because I do have to talk to you guys about my editing software. I've used CapCut just because it's really easy and it's been free. It's no longer working in the United States anymore as of right now, so I'm trying to learn a non-linear editor like DaVinci. So if the editing in my couple of videos going forward is a little choppier than normal, that's why. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I was blindsided by this. I was not prepared. Probably the best way to get me on an actual real big boy editing software. So I'll take it. I'm not that upset about it, but bear with me as we get through these growing pains. Okay, I'm gonna let this very charming, handsome young fellow keep going with the video. Bye-bye. So let's talk about the three different types, or these aren't necessarily the only types, but let's talk about three different types of damage and what are they good for and what's bad about them, right? So when you just have flat damage, right? Let's say I'm gonna pick Cassidy here, right? Cassidy just does 70 to the, or 140 to the head, 70 to the body, right? That's flat damage. You can do the same amount every time, save for the damage drop off, which is its own thing. But for the sake of the argument, it does 70 damage, right? That means that everything is easy to read. It's very stable, right? When I'm playing Cass, I know that my bullets are going to do the same amount for everybody on the battlefield, right? And again, we're going to ignore armor and tank headshot reduction for the sake of this argument, right? That's the general gist of it, right? But that can create some disparities between health pools because, you know, on a squishy target like this, I can 2-tap, right? But on Ramatra, for instance, it takes me a lot longer, right? So this is, you know, basically more effective on these types of characters. There's nothing wrong with that design, but it can create some issues, right? I think another one is like Widow, right? Widow's like, she doesn't do as much to tanks, but she can just one-shot squishies, right? So squishies matter way more, and that's part of her design, but it creates some spikes, some problems there, right? If you do percentage-based damage only, it levels the playing field and it makes all roles afraid of you. Again, they don't really have anything like that here. Or actually, there is something in Overwatch that has that. Let's talk about Sigma. Sigma and Sombra actually have some percentage-based numbers, but I think Sig kind of shows this point better, right? So 50% means that I'm going to hit these guys and they're going to go down to, you know, 100, a little more because of the initial damage. And then I'm going to get my ult back. I'm going to do a Ramatra, but he's going to go all the way down to, you know, more than half as well. So that is one example, right? So everyone is equally as afraid of his ult because it does half of your health bar, half of your relative health. The problem that comes here is that healing ends up becoming disproportionately more powerful on the lower health pools, because think of it this way. These guys go down to 150 after that ult, while Ramattra goes down to, 200 or whatever. Percentage-wise, a DPS is probably going to be taking less damage overall because they're smaller, whatever. Probably running around is more. Ramattra is going to be taking more damage. However, my supports can only heal them up at the same rate. So, Baptiste gets a shot on this guy, gets him 70 health. Well, now he's back up to half. But if he does 70 health with Ramattra, he's not back up to half, right? And continuing more, do one more shot. Well, this guy's almost at full. This guy's probably only basically at half or a little higher. Do you see what I'm saying there? So there's some disproportionate effects there where it's actually better against certain counterplay depending on your health pool, right? Then there's the hybrid model, which Sigma's ult actually had that because it had an initial burst damage, right? That initial damage does 50. I believe it does 50. And then the rest of it does more. That's the hybrid, right? It does some flat, some percentage based. Scarlet Witch works like this, right? Part of her damage is percentage based. Some of it is just flat damage per second. What this does is means that she's more effective against squishies because she's doing like a flat rate, which the flat rate affects them more, right? The flat rate affects characters with lower health pools more because that is a higher percentage of their health bar compared to a tank. So you can kind of use that to tune like, okay, I want this character to be better into tanks, so we're going to put more of it into percentage-based health outside of the flat. And then you can kind of make a good middle ground where you're effective against most types of people, right? The only like real downside about this is that it's really hard to read and kind of understand, right? When I'm kind of looking at a Scarlet Witch, or kind of like a better example, like how much is it going to do, right? How much do I have to be worried about this? Because I have to kind of do the math in my head, like, oh, I'm on a character that has 275 HP, so it's gonna be doing a little bit more proportionally, or a little bit less, compared to what I was just on. It can be hard to read, and it can be like, why is, Scarlet Witch doing different amounts, like, even against, like, somebody with 700 HP to 800 HP? Like, she's gonna be doing different amounts, and she may not be able to, in her head, kind of figure out, is she gonna kill in this amount of time? Do you see what I'm talking about there? I think hers isn't as bad, but especially if you have like a bigger burst of damage into percentage-based damage, that is when it gets like really hard to track properly, in my opinion. So, with that in mind, Overwatch really only has two things that really work like this. Sigma ult and Sombra ult. If I'm missing some, please let me know, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of how it is. So for this video, we're not going to be talking about like armor because that's its own different beast, headshot stuff, scalers, stuff like that. At least scalers in the traditional sense. We're talking about health-based stuff. So it's not going to be changing about like, oh, this guy only has 200 HP, so it's going to do this. That's the kind of like how Echo Beam works. That's not what we're really talking about here. I'm also looking for genuine problems with character kits that might be able, in theory, to change. Like, so basically, I don't want to like rework characters, if that makes sense, right? You change an ability that they already have and kind of add percentage-based damage or anything like that to them that they might benefit from. That's kind of what I'm looking for here. I'm not going to hit everything. You could list everything, right? You could use percentage-based damage as a solution to anything, really. Obviously, I'm not going to look at that. Like, I don't, in my list here, like, I don't have Sim. Sim is proportionally really good against tanks because she can build it off of them. It's easier to hit them as it scales, it's just really easy to beam them down. You could use a solution like that on Sim, but it's really basic, and I'm trying to go for a little more interesting, a little more bite here. So that's why I've like not included a lot of characters like that. And I'm not going to be talking about specific numbers. I'm not balancing this. It's really more about like kind of getting in the gist and the mindset about like, okay, when we add the percentage based in this way, or percentage based damage in this way, what does that actually do? Do we think that's healthier? And then actual balance from there, I think is, you kind of have to determine that as it goes. I'm not designing this, right? I could go in the workshop and kind of like adjust it maybe, but I'm not going to do that. That's a lot going on there. So with all that being said, I think we can go ahead and get on to our first hero here. Excuse me, let me tab out and make sure I got all my notes ready to go. Hazard is interesting because Hazard is really, really strong right now. And I didn't think about this when I made my Hazard video, but I kind of came up with maybe another solution to kind of reduce Hazard's lethality on backline. Because right now, we're kind of in a bit of a one-shot meta. Yes, Hazard doesn't die, remove him from the equation. But with the insane amount of burst that Hazard provides, that Genji and Sojourn provide, that Kiriko can provide as well, Lucio, to an extent, you know, you can really just blow something up with these characters. So, and it's all kind of at the crux because Hazard combo is so good. So let's talk about, you know, Hazard's insane burst with these characters, right? Let me kill these guys. They have 200 health here, but like, look at that. They're like instantly dead. If I go bring somebody, you know, Ashe, if I can hit her head here. Look at that. She almost died. Like, that's like 240 damage. Plus, you know, even if you just hit a slash, that's a Sojourn bullet to the head. Dead instantly, right? There was a lot of damage on this character. But I do want to talk to you about Hazard potentially having that kind of hybrid health-based damage model, because since you can combo his primary into his slash, that's two different things, right? So I think his primary can have its own amount of damage, but I think to encourage you to be a little more like on, maybe not always on a squishy at all times, reduce the burst, and encourage you to maybe make a tank trade, you can change the numbers a little bit to where his slash becomes percentage-based damage, right? So instead of doing 75 to like a 250 health target, it's like 50. And then instead of doing 75 to like a tank or anybody with like higher health, right? It does like 100. It does maybe even more than that, right? So you reduce the burst damage on the squishies, remove some of that, but you still keep like the combo, you still keep the, it's just harder to get, right? You still keep the feel of the character, but then you have a little bit more options, right? So now I can make a decision like, do I think I'm gonna be able to get the kill with my team? No. Well, the Hazard's on my backline. What if I just turn on him and do a lot more damage? You see what I'm talking about there, right? I think that could be an interesting idea to like open up Hazard's kit a little more while also reducing that burst damage and allow him to still have a gun that feels pretty good. Now, in my opinion, I think his gun should do less damage regardless of anything. Not all the way back down to what it was, but still, I think it could do that, and that would help to reduce the burst as well. But that way, again, you're kind of encouraged to look at other people. There's a little more decision making there. That's kind of a lot of where I'm going for, right? Where characters have a lot more like linear decision, like playmaking with these abilities. Like Hazard slashing a tank is never going to be as effective as a squishy. There's nothing wrong with that, but kind of leveling it out a little bit allows you to be a little more like to be more worth it if you have to go hit a tank or hit a character with higher health. Do you see what I mean there? So that's something there for Hazard. I have a whole Hazard video if you want to check that out. I have a lot more solutions about how to bring him in a little more. Maga is interesting because Maga gets a lot of sustain off tanks because, you know, they're very easy to hit, the way that his spread works, whatever. There's a lot of ways I think you could change Maga to be, you know, encourage him to shoot squishies a lot. But I'm going to suggest something here as well. So when you hit, what's it called? When you hit people with headshots, crits, right? You get overhealth. What if the overhealth you gained from his passive scaled with the health of the victim? So basically, you get like a percentage of their health, or sorry, the percentage amount that you do to their health bar total determines how much overshield you get, not the damage that you do. So if I do 100 damage worth of that, I get a certain amount, but I would have to do to Hazard, you know, that much to get the same amount of overhealth, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. So you're actually encouraged a little more to shoot the squishies because it's relatively easier to get your sustain off of them. But getting the damage, it's a little harder. They're not, you know, they don't work with your miniguns as well. So if you want to get more damage and maybe more consistent, reliable overhealth, that's when you can shoot the tank. You see what I'm talking about there? And then, of course, you could always, like, tune his damage down as well. There, again, I don't want to go into the weeds of, like, balancing Maga from there, but I'm saying more like, in terms of his sustain, you know, you can even apply this to Cardiac. You have less healing if you're shooting a tank, right? You're really encouraged to get in there and shoot these guys in the squishies more, but you still have an option, right? This is still not a bad thing. And it reduces the amount that you're going to be shooting the tank, right? And just focusing them, and it's also reducing the effectiveness of it when you do. I think that's a really good, like, that could be a potentially pretty cool solution. Maga has a lot of problems again, but this is one that I can think that would be pretty beneficial. I think you would feel it in the long run. Maga's playstyle would kind of change for the better if you implemented something like this. And again, the volume, like the max, how do I say this? Like the difference that you get, it's all balanced. Like again, I'm not going to tell you like, oh, you get like 20% more if you shoot. No. I don't know. But there should be some difference, right? To a tangible degree. That's kind of where we're going at, right? All right, moving on here. I've got Ashe. Now, I could have talked about this with Maga too. I couldn't really fit it into his kit with that one. So we're going to talk about Ashe. Ashe Dynamite is a great example of a hybrid, right? It is a damage over time ability with a burst at the beginning. It's very good burst and dot on squishies. It's very effective against squishies. And on tanks, it's really more of like an anti-sustain tool. Not to say that, I mean, Dynamite really doesn't need that much change, right? I don't think Ashe really needs a lot of changes. But if it ever becomes a problem that Ashe is just too effective against squishies, like it has been before, I think you could add a health scale on the, percentage based, just raw percentage based on fire, right? So it does a certain percent of your health bar, the damage over time. That could do it to keep like, if I want to get a tank off of me, it would do considerably more damage to them percent or like total than it would to these guys. So you have a little bit more room to play. And you have more effectiveness on tanks if you actually hit them. And you don't like hit them with super big burst because the burst damage doesn't change, right? Like you still have the burst against squishies. It's still really good against squishies, right? You can still do that, but it's not going to do this much. Like, it's not going to do 150 to the squishies. It may do like 120. And then on these guys, it would do like a total of 200, 250. Something a little more effective, like if you want to get tanks off of you. Again, maybe a little strong, change the numbers a little bit. But it might give Ashe a little bit more like decisions about how she wants to use her dynamite. Again, I don't think this one is like necessary per se. It's not necessarily a problem, but again, that's like it's a good example of abilities with burst and dot. Maybe a better example is Sombra, where assassinating squishies is less effective because her damage over time on her virus does less. You know what I mean? That's not virus. There we go. Her damage over time does less to squishies. Maybe at the end of this, they're left with 700, or they're left with 75 HP taken out instead of like 100. That's kind of what I'm saying there, right? For those types of abilities where they have damage over time and they have what's it called? And they have a dot effect. I think you make the dot percentage based. That could be a really good way to make sure that the assassination isn't as good, right? The burst isn't as good. May I think struggles to find a place in Overwatch 2 because she has less of her identity. And, I think the easy thing to do is like, make her freeze, her left click percentage base. But I don't want to do that because it really is really good against tanks if you do it that way. And I don't know if we want that because of the slow. So what I'm going to propose is that we bring back Deep Chill. If you remember what Deep Chill, I don't remember if that's the correct, I don't know if that's what it's called, but if you remember what that was, it was the experiment they made where you hold down and then instead of them freezing completely, they just get slowed for like a second to like 75, 80%. One, let's not make it 75, 80, let's make it like 50, even less than that. But two, what happened is that when they were in that state, if you right click them, it would do whatever damage plus an extra like 30. I can't even remember what the number was. It's been so long since they removed it. I like that as a middle ground solution to keep May's like, what's it called? Keeping her gameplay loop, right? Her game plan similar to her freeze and keep making her fun like that. You have something to work towards. But that was really good against squishies, right? You just walked up to a squishy, freeze them, and then you hit them like that, and then they just take monstrous amounts of damage. So I propose that what if that pop damage, that burst damage, not damage over time, not this one, not the effective damage, the burst damage scaled with their health. So it wasn't as bursty against DPS, but you got a little bit more burst damage against tanks, right? That way, and I also should mention, I'm trying to make it so that burst isn't like, you're not dying like super quickly on DPS, but tanks are taking more damage, so sustain isn't as good, because overall tanks will be taking more damage, and I think that tanks definitely need to take more damage, if you ask me. So I think it's kind of like a best of both worlds solution, where tanks can be punished more, but DPS don't feel like they're just absolutely exploding in some metas. That's kind of where I'm going for here. The difference here with Mei, obviously, is that it is, what's it called? It's tied to the burst damage. So the burst damage, what's it called? It's just different, right? It's just different. So the burst damage against tanks is better. You don't want everything to be like damage over time against tanks is better. Like, you want to have some variety, right? So in this case, the burst damage would be better. Yeah, basically that's kind of what I'm going at, right? You don't need to do it on the dot. You don't need to do it on the burst per se. In fact, you could add it to both. You could add it to neither. Stuff like that. Reaper. Reaper is next here. Reaper is not actually... this is actually a change that I proposed. It's kind of like the Maga change, but I proposed this in my Reaper rework. His lifesteal disproportionately affects tanks because it's much easier to get it off of tanks. So if you make his lifesteal, what's it called? Percentage based again. So if I do half health to this guy and then I go over to Hazard and I do half health, that's the equivalent of healing the same amount, right? So you're encouraged to actually take duels. I think Reaper cannot take duels. He needs help. He needs help taking duels. So giving him more lifesteal on squishies will give him more effective health in those duels. And I will say this, I think effective health is the most important thing when you're fighting a duel, right? When you have a support on you, you know, you're 1v2. One DPS and the other side is one DPS, one support. The effective health is so much better when, you know, it's just hard to kill them because they're just constantly getting healed back up. It takes longer to kill them, but it doesn't change for you. So Reaper really struggled in duels like that because his effective health was just too low because he was not getting, you know, reliable sustain off of squishies. So here, this rewards him for aiming well, doing well, getting more effective health, and then discourages him from shooting the tank in the front line. Like, it allows him to do more things because the only way to get lifesteal is not just from shooting these guys over here. Does that make sense? Just sitting in the front line and hoping that you just do so much cleave damage to their tank. That's, or not cleave, but you know what I mean? That's where I think that creates an interesting dynamic for Reaper. Sojourn. Sojourn is an interesting one. Don't change her damage numbers. I know this is about damage, but I'm actually not changing Sojourn's damage numbers here. I'm changing her charge. I've said this for a while, is that I want her to charge less against tanks. But what if she just charged less comparatively to their health bar? So, if I hit a 250 health character, I do one body shot. I guess I do two body shots. I'll do 10. But if I do, what's it called? A really high health character, I do less. I actually get less. So I'm not just encouraged to shoot tank, whatever, and then go blow up a squishy. I actually have some incentive to try and duel the squishy with the primary fire, right? Then, you know, you can probably take a little bit of power out of the primary fire. You can do a lot from there. I'm not going to suggest anything because that's just its own can of worms. But that means that Sojourn actually has more choice about, okay, I actually want to, like, shoot the DPS and, like, not shoot my rail all the way and try to, you know, kill them a little quicker that way. Instead of just holding rail, I still don't have an angle. Let me refresh on the tank, then hit them, right? More decision making, more stuff. And again, that's less damage taken by the tank because you're less incentivized to shoot the tank because the reward is less. You're more incentivized to try and hit backlines so you have higher DPS output that is not negligible, right? Because this is kind of negligible in some regards, but you're encouraged a lot more to get a lot more good damage because your rail is charging faster than it was on the tank, right? And I think that's a really good way to nerf Sojourn's charge because her DPS output is really high, but I do think she needs that kind of burst damage in her kit. So having it up less often because you get less rewards by shooting different characters, I think is a good idea. And it scales, you know, if you have a less health tank, she'll get more charge off of a Junker Queen compared to a a Roadhog, right? And of course, I will say though, you don't want to have like half values of charge. So like I would say maybe like do a floor. So if, you know, her charge rate after calculation would be 2.5, just make it have 2. Add 2 to her charge rate. So she's not like super powerful. Because that also means like if somebody has like 350 HP, she's not just always getting, what's it called? Or 300 HP is a better example. 275. 275. There are characters with 275. If somebody has 275, she's not also getting 5, she's getting 4. You know what I mean? Etc., etc., etc. I think that's one way to do it, but I think that's an interesting way. I've been trying to figure out a solution to keep Sojourn's like burst potential, but just keep it less. And I think this is like a really interesting way to do it if they wanted to go this way. All right, Ana. For Ana, we're going to kind of tweak how anti-nade works a little bit here. I think we all know that it disproportionately affects tanks just because they're in the front line. Taking a lot of damage is very easy to hit them. They need that sustain to really stay in the fight and keep going. So instead of it being a complete anti-nade, I've liked the idea for a while that it becomes a heal reduction. So you still have some kind of like variety about like playing around, like I can still heal my teammates, it's just gonna be way less effective, but it might be the difference between life or death. Like there's still some kind of counterplay, just to a much lesser extent. So with Ana, if you work on the heal reduction, you could have the value of the heal reduction be less for tanks. You know what I mean? Because tanks are really like, it really affects them. And I feel like when you hit a squishy, right, they just like, it's a lot easier for them to hide. Like it's not really like they're out in the open, you hit a squishy and you kill them, right? You kind of, excuse me, they wait for their people to engage and to rotate, but it's really easy to like wait for tank to engage, throw it on them, and then just kind of completely burn them. Now, you know, I hit a 250 health character and it does 80% damage reduction, 90% damage reduction, but I hit Hazard and it only does like 60% damage reduction. I know sustain is too good in this game, do not get me wrong, but I just think anti-nade and anti in general, like this could go for Junker Queen as well. It's just so too much of an ability that is like, it's too good. Like it does so much that you kind of need to have some kind of answer to it all the time, like a specific answer like cleanse or even speed boost. But if you allow there to be some sort of healing to get through, just as a small amount, a smaller amount, you still have some way to play around that if you don't have a cleanse, right? It actually devalues cleanse abilities like Kiriko Suzu because you have somebody else to get around it. And I think that is a lot healthier. And again, if it is somehow able to not affect tanks as much, I think that's great, right? I think that's like a really good best of both worlds solution there as well. So that's kind of like my like solution for anti-nade. Damage reduction ability, high damage reduction, don't get me wrong, high damage reduction, but it scales with your health. If you have higher health, you have less, right? And again, that also goes into that thing about like, since healing is more of like, is better against, you know, like generally like, again, like Baptiste healing, 70 damage or 70 healing per bullet, right? It's more effective against lower health targets. Now when they're heal reduced, it would do like the same. Do you know what I mean? Like it does more for Hazard, but that's high, like the same percentage of his health bar getting healed up, right? So it actually kind of levels the playing field for healing, if that makes sense, right? It's not like more effective against squishies. It's a lot more like narrower in that regard. It's just an interesting dynamic. I don't know if that's good or bad or better in any regard. I just think it's interesting. All right, Brig. Repair Pack gives a lot of burst. But I have an idea here because Repair Pack is really, really good on squishies, again, because it just heals a lot more of their health bar, the burst, and the damage over time. Like, if you're packing your tank, you're probably trolling, right? You want to let your flex support do that. But there are times where you kind of have to pack your tank, too. So if we keep the burst, you know, let's lower the burst just a little bit because I think it's just too strong. That's not even like part of the video, just saying like, I think the burst is too strong. But keep a burst, right? So that it does proportionally more for your squishies, your flankers, whatever. But my solution here is not just to make the healing more effective if they have more health. My solution is, what if you allowed them to get more healing over time like longer, like the same rate, but for longer if they're a tank. You know what I mean? So that tank actually gets more healing total, but it's harder, like it just takes longer to affect them, right? Then you could stack these longer and you could actually give them a lot of sustain, but you have to completely blow your load to do that, right? Like even though they'd have break pack for a while, you wouldn't have packs to help your team, right? So there actually is some merit to packing your tank now, but there isn't a lot, right? So if you have to do it, that's okay, but you know, it's still not going to be the best example there as well. If you want to get really crazy, you could also give tanks more burst instead. Or another thing I kind of came up with is like, what if, you know how Sombra, when you're hacked, virus ticks down faster, so you take more damage per second. What if you actually took the health pack faster if you had higher health or lower health or something, depending on what's good? Like if tank sustain is really good with break pack, you can make it go faster so that it's not very sustainy, it's more bursty. But if DPS is really good sustain wise, which it typically isn't, then you would actually make it tick faster or slower, regardless, depending, right? I think that could be an interesting solution as well. Just all types of stuff that you could do, right? I think I'm not like married to any one idea, but I'm kind of trying to think outside of the box about like, how could you introduce these percentage-based like stats into the game to make them interesting, fun, make the characters more engaging to play as and against. And then I'm just going to kind of rapid fire a couple of these last ones. I said maybe Kiri headshot gets a higher percentage boost on higher health targets. That could be for any headshot. Probably not do that, but I'm just putting it out there, right? Maybe there is a character that does more headshot damage to higher health characters, percentage wise. What if Lifeweaver, or any cooldown, but I'm going to say Lifeweaver in this regard, had a different cooldown? His life grip had a different cooldown for how much max health somebody has. So repositioning a tank is not detrimental to your team. If you reposition a tank, somebody with higher health, you get your pull back faster because you're going to be using it a lot more to, to reposition them instead of like a DPS who you would save and completely heal up, right? You're not going to heal everybody up all the way like a tank if you pull them. Now, I see a problem here where you just pull the tank, they take aggro, they come back. Again, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, right? They pull aggro, you pull them, they go back in, the cooldown's lower, you pull them. You see what I'm talking about? Not a perfect solution there. I'm just throwing it out. Maybe there's another character I missed. I'd love to hear your suggestions down below. And then also, Discord, that's the one to bring it home here, right? Obviously, it hurts tanks more. So if it's percentage-based thing, you do, against this guy, you do 30% more damage. But against a tank, you only do 15% more damage, 30% more damage, stuff like that, right? I think Zenyatta is a perfect example. Now, I will say, I'll admit for Zenyatta, I do like the Discord lockout. I think it makes it more fun to play him because you have limits and you have to kind of think about when you Discord and who you Discord. But not that Discord is a perfect ability that is still, you know what I mean? Like there is counterplay to it, but I think we could go a little further, right? Just make it do less to tanks. That could work. That could actually really help. And again, like I want to make it clear that this is not supposed to be like a substitution for or an addition to role passives, because it affects all the cast differently. Everyone's got different health values. You've got characters with 175 HP. You've got characters all the way up to like 800, 600. Oh, it's open queue health. You see what I mean, though, right? You got characters that go all the way up to the moon with their health bars. So, it is a bit of like it can differ, right? Because even in the DPS category, again, like 175, but all the way up to like Bastion, who's got like 350. So Tracer and Bastion get affected by those abilities differently because they kind of need it, right? Bastion is tankier. He probably needs a little bit of help to keep his survivability up. Everything like that. So that's kind of where I think Overwatch really could start experimenting with these types of abilities, especially on new characters. But I think there are a couple of things that could save some old characters, at least make them more interesting, more engaging, all of that. That's what I really want, right? So with that being said, please subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, but I want to hear back from you guys. Can you think of anywhere else they could add some of these? Like, I'm sure we could count everything, right? But we could use any ability. But what is something interesting that I missed here? Again, I talked about how there were a couple abilities I just left out because it felt redundant. And in fact, there were a couple abilities I left in and they still felt redundant. But I just wanted to like show you real examples of how you could get creative with this kind of stuff. Please let me know down below, what do you think about these and what do you think about any other ones as well? This was streamed live, twitch.tv/LaneHemingway. That's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. If you want to get in on this discussion live, talk to me about it when it happens. Excuse me. That's the best place to do it as well. And join my Discord down below if you want to keep up with all things Lane Hemingway going forward. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching, and please have a good day.